Brandon, thank you for coming to the Schiller Hamilton podcast. Actually, it's been a while since we've done one of these, probably a month or two. So thank you for coming along. For those that don't know, Brandon is newly elected to serve as my representative to the South Carolina State House. So
District
first of all,
48.
Congratulations, and thank you for agreeing to spend so much time in Columbia on all of our behalf. So I know that's not easy to do given your other life as a business owner and family man. So we're all grateful for that. But
I'm looking forward to it.
But I'm not here to talk about politics today. That's the subject for a whole nother day. If you would, I think your backstory is important here in Jermaine. And I don't want to tell it. I'd like for you to tell it. So you're born and raised in Rock Hill. Start there.
Yep, born and raised in Rock Hill. Grew up, went to 4 different elementary schools, 2 different middle schools, both the high schools. Literally been all over Rock Hill. I'm one of those that love the area, never wanted to leave. Met my wife. I'm a graduate of Northwestern High School, and I met my wife, who is a graduate of Rock Hill High School. And we've been married for 19 years, been together for 22. So we got married in 2003, and then had our oldest son, Gavin, in 2004, middle son, Cohen, in 2006, and we have a 4-year-old as well. But coached soccer here locally as the kids were growing up. Own multiple small businesses in the area. So everything I do is based in this area.
Yeah, tell me about your businesses. When did you start your business, and where did the impetus come from?
I was doing advertising for 10 years up in Charlotte. Mm-hmm. I've always been very goal-oriented. I don't believe you can hit a target unless you actually can see it in front of you. So I set all my goals. I became the top rep within the region within the first couple of years, and then became the top in the nation, I think, year 5. And by year 7, I was top in print and digital.
So this was for a national media.
This is the world's largest media company.
Okay.
So I busted my tail. There was a lot of people that were far more qualified than I was.
And somehow you managed to hit those numbers in the Charlotte market?
Charlotte's a C market, too.
And that would have been like what years?
That would have been from 2001 up until 2009.
Okay. And so for those who aren't aware, possibly, Charlotte was not what it is now between the years of 2001 and 2009. It was basically still a kind of a sleepy backwater town.
It was a C market for sure.
Yeah.
And I started having panic attacks. Everything that I thought that I'd wanted, I'd accomplished. You know, you've got this vision whenever you're planning out your career. This is what you want to do. And I was doing all those things. I had the money. I had, the family. Everything was laid out. And for some reason, I was having panic attacks. And couldn't figure out what it was. And I started praying about it. And I had invested into a lawn care company for a friend of mine, and he ended up getting, I think it was a DUI or something, and he ended up going to jail for a little bit of time. So I was cutting grass on the weekends. What I found while I was cutting grass on the weekends was it was very relaxing. So I decided to leave my profession, not pay myself for 5 years, and start a lawn care business.
Oh, because you really enjoyed. Now I enjoy cutting my own grass on a Saturday. Yeah. It's something else to take that and turn it into a profession. But I understand it's like there's something very like meditative about it almost. You're like in a separate zone.
Yeah, and it gave me the free time to be there with my boys as they were growing up. While I was accomplishing things in my career, I wasn't being the man that I wanted to be as far as a family man. Yeah. I was always traveling. I was always working. But, of course, with my drive, I couldn't leave it as a small-time loan maintenance company. I grew it into one of the larger companies in the area. I learned very quickly that my specialty is in marketing and advertising, not management. Mm-hmm. Kind of grew too fast. But while I had the lawn care company, a friend of mine was splitting up with a partner in his heating and air business, so invested and took over a heating and air business. And then the opportunity came to open a mulch yard on Mount Gallant Road. Mm-hmm. And whenever I looked at the numbers, it just, to me, even if no one came, we were covering our cost at that time because it was so cheap at that time. So I went ahead and opened the supply yard, and then once I started doing that, I realized I enjoyed that better. That was more of the marketing, the advertising. I could coach some of the landscapers around here and give them advice from my experience, help them avoid some of the pitfalls that I ran into. And I really enjoyed that. We've had that for 6 years now. And yeah, now I'm just the landscaping we should be done with by the end of the year, selling off the rest of it. The landscape supply will be moving that company, and then the heat and air will be restructuring as well.
Now, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention the name of all this. So the name of your 360.
360 Supply, 360 LLC is the company that owns 360 HVAC and 360 Lawn Care.
So you started out in lawn service and then got into all these other services. Is that sort of where the name 360 came from? Because 360 is kind of all the way around everything.
Well, being an advertising, I originally wanted to name the company 180 for We'll Turn Your Property Around. But before there was a big green K, or before these plumbing companies started doing everything, my goal was to be a local contractor that doesn't necessarily have to provide all the services. So with the supply yard, we tell people, even if we can't provide it, come up there. We'll give you cards that we recommend. So it's like a local Angie's List. These contractors are people that we know that we haven't had any complaints on. And as we're feeding their businesses, of course, it all comes back to us. But my original vision was to have one main company and then have a plumbing, a heat and air, painting. I wanted all of the different divisions to be one. And I realized how difficult that is just trying to run so many employees in lawn care. And right now, you just can't hire hourly employees.
So it sounds like throughout that time, when you were in your previous career doing advertising, it sounds like your values just were not aligned with what you were doing. You weren't getting the time with your family. You weren't doing other things. And knowing you, I'm sure there was that impulse to like help in the community or be, to be a net benefit to the area surrounding you. How did all of those things change, and how did you kind of realize those other values while you were kind of opening your business? Because opening a business is hard. How did you make time, and what was your process for doing those things?
Like I said, I believe in hard work, and I never really plan things out. I just go where I feel like I'm being led to go, and I jump in and I figure it out. But the one thing I did know was that money is not what's most important to me. I felt like I had the money and had all those things, and I just wasn't happy. I was a lot happier whenever my kids were growing up watching PBS and I'm out there cutting grass for 12 hours a day. That was probably some of the happiest times of my life.
Yeah.
But then as I started getting involved and being, while I was doing my career in Charlotte, I wasn't as focused on what was going on locally. But then once I started running my businesses here, I got involved, became president of my HOA, started realizing some of the problems, and that got me more involved in politics. And I got very interested in politics, and I would attend the GOP meetings whenever I was in my early 20s, but I just wasn't very active. It was just kind of sit back, watch, and learn. And Paul Lindeman, who was on York County Council, was somebody I went to high school with, and I always admired that he was so young and was able to step up and get elected.
So did you talk to him about it?
I did. Well, I talked to him about it afterwards, not before I filed. So whenever it come to filing, that's another one of those faith things where I told my wife that I felt like I had a call in to do so. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind because I knew about state, I knew about city, but I had never attended a county council meeting or really understood what happened on the county level. And she told me to pray for a sign, and 2 days before the filing deadline, I had to show up at my yard. 2 employees had called out. I'm opening it up, trying to rush while contractors are waiting, and one of the contractors said, if you know anybody will run against this guy Blackwell, you let me know. And I took that as a sign, drove down and filed. I didn't know I had to choose Republican and Democrat. I didn't know I had to pay a fee. I didn't know any of that. But the way I do everything is, I don't want to say I fly by the seat of my pants, but I go solely based off of faith.
And one thing, as an outside observer, a big part of that too seems to just be openness. Like you've kind of been very open and transparent, whether it was way back when you were running your first campaign and you just decided, I'm just going to put everything out there.
Taking the Eminem approach.
Yeah, there's no hidden agenda. We're just going to err on the side of just putting it all out there. And part of that was like the time period, right? Because it was during COVID. And so, you were kind of forced to run a online candidacy, which, thankfully you had plenty of experience in, digital marketing and those kinds of things. But that was favorite novel at the time.
Yeah, my favorite part of that was the WRHI interview, I think my first one. Mm-hmm. And Manning Kimmel said, so you agree with Britt? You wouldn't change anything that he did? Because I don't believe in playing Monday morning quarterback. I'm never going to sit here and bash someone for what they did in the past. Bottom line is, let's look forward, use the history, and see how we can move forward. I'm not interested in trying to complain about what someone's done in the past. Mm-hmm. But he said, so you wouldn't change anything, you agree with everything, so you just want us to vote for you because you're younger? And I said, yeah, pretty much. But I've always tried to take that honest approach. I tell people it took me 20 years to become a Christian because I felt like everyone was either perfect or a hypocrite, and I couldn't be either. And I feel that our community, our country, we all lack grace. We're all trying to act like we're perfect. And until we start having people own their mess and realize that we're all a mess, then nothing's going to change.
So you just articulated what might be my next question. I was going to ask, what is the thing that changed that made you change? Like what was the realization or what was the thought? Was that it?
No, I mean, I think I've always been that way. I've had a lot of thoughts that are, I guess, kind of becoming more mainstream now. I'll use this as an example. My oldest son would have been 18. So 19 years ago, 18 years ago, whenever he was born, I've always believed if you want to stop racism, quit asking people their race. Mm-hmm. So whenever they give you the birth certificate, you're supposed to check what the race is on there. Well, on there, I checked Hispanic for him. My middle son was born, I checked Caucasian. My youngest son, Callahan, whenever they asked me to check his race, I checked every box. And they said, we can't do that. And I said, well, I'm not choosing, you choose. Bring out your skin color chart, and y'all choose whatever y'all think is best. And the nurse was like, well, can we just list them as biracial? Sure. So I've got a Hispanic, a Caucasian, and a biracial kid all by the same mother. But yeah, I just, my beliefs have always been, once I found faith, I think that's where the clarity came. And I stayed out of church because I felt like people were always judging. I think it's one of the things that turned people off at church.
Right.
And bottom line is every single person sitting in there is a sinner. Someone even said something to me the other day about my history, because growing up I got into a lot of fights. So as a juvenile, I was arrested quite a few times. That's not like a public record thing. Mm-hmm. But someone said something. I said, well, Jesus was a criminal. They said, no, Jesus was perfect. I said, no. According to the state, he was a criminal. That's the reason he was crucified. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I believe you got to do what's right and just be a better man tomorrow than you are today. Mm-hmm. And that's the approach I try to take.
Just be better.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've been through this election over the last year. Very hard fought. You had a primary that was, contentious. Coming out of that primary, it probably felt like, somewhat smooth sailing because you're on your way to a general election that you are confident that you're going to prevail in.
Yeah.
And then you have your son, Gavin. I know this is difficult, but this is, one of the reasons why I think it's important that we sit down and talk today, because you've been very open and transparent with the way that your family has reacted to your tragedy. And I believe that's all in the hope that will help other people that have been through the same thing. So what would you like to share about that timeline and what y'all went through? And then I think it's really important that we also discuss the community's reaction to y'all's tragedy.
Yeah, and I think whenever you say it's important to share, I believe with me being transparent, I posted a video my last night on council, and I even got some backlash about that. People were upset that I waited until the night before the election to post a video. But the reason that I did it was because that very well could have been the last time that I had a public platform. If I was to lose the election, then I wouldn't have that option. And even with doing that, I had to seek permission prior to doing so.
Permission from whom?
From the investigators.
Okay.
So there's still investigations going on with Gavin's case. So there's some things I can say, some things I can't. One of the things that, well, we'll go back to the election.
Yeah.
My family during that election was attacked. I say I didn't grow up with much, but I grew up with a name, and if you attack my name, that's about the worst thing that you can do. You can attack me on policy, you can attack me on bad decisions. God knows I got plenty of them that you could pick and choose from, but don't come after me personally. And I felt like I'd come after me personally, and not only that, my kids as well. So Gavin and Cohen were very active in my campaign, and whenever we won in the runoff, it was one of the happiest times because it was all one big group hug. And I remember Gavin saying, "We did it, Dad. We did it. It wasn't I did it. It was we did it." So yeah, you're coming off of that high, and then Gavin and Cohen took off. I think it was maybe a week later. Took off to Young Life Camp. Gavin got saved at camp, truly getting saved, turning his life over. Boys come back. Both of them had COVID, so we had them under quarantine. Just about everyone that come back from the camp had COVID. And the 4-year-old, Callahan and Gavin shared a room together. So we took Callahan out and put him into the living room where he was staying, and Gavin in his room, Cohen in his room. And those 4 or 5 days that they were in quarantine, it was the last day of quarantine whenever Gavin decided to take his life. And we didn't know what the purpose was, but I came home. It was July 26th I was home. July 27th is his actual death date, but it was July 26th whenever everything transpired. I didn't get in. I was talking to another state house rep outside, and I come in, and it was shortly before 1 o'clock in the morning. Cohen was already in bed. Callahan was asleep on the couch. Gavin typically was playing video games in his room. And I'd been fussing at Gavin the previous 2 days about not getting his college paperwork and everything done properly. And I was trying to help him, but he wanted to sleep until noon, 1 o'clock. And it's like, you're not sleeping all day and then expecting me to just drop what I'm doing to come help you. But that was the only type of issues we had. But even with them coming back from camp, we sat down. Gavin was one of those kids that we sat down and we discussed everything. And that's the shocking part to me. There was always situations where I never felt like he couldn't come to me, no matter what it was. And in this situation, it was 1:30. I'm laying in the bed and replying to some emails. Hadn't even taken off my work clothes yet, just kind of laying in the bed checking emails. And Gavin comes out of his room. He's very quiet, which was odd because they're usually slamming doors. You hear a bathroom door shut or a refrigerator door.
Kids, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't hear anything, so that kind of just something told me to get up. And whenever I got up, I started walking down the hallway, and there's a doorway that separates essentially our living room from all the bedrooms in the hall, and there's a bathroom right there. And as Gavin was coming back, he was in his underwear, but he was kind of covering up his privates. In my mind, I'm thinking he's a teenager. I'm trying to make sure I'm not looking or questioning or anything. So I just said, "Good night, bud. I love you." And I want to say he said, "Good night, Dad. I love you," but I think he said, "I'll see you in the morning." Walked into the white room, leaned down, and gave Callie a kiss, and sounded like a bowling ball coming down the wall. Immediately ran in and screamed, "Gavin." Gavin couldn't get anything, so I kicked the door in, and whenever I came in, he was laying in between the tub and the toilet. And what it looked like was like standing on the side of the toilet. My immediate thought was he was standing on the side of the shower, like getting in or out of the shower, slipped and hit his head because of the way that he was laying. I ran in there and, started to have blood, but I still didn't realize that he had shot himself. I was just trying to find the wound, trying to stop it. Yelling, of course, wife comes in. I kind of cover him up, just telling her to call 911, but didn't want her to see what was going on. And then at that time, I smelled the gunpowder and seen the gun there. And the big question was, throughout all of this, was why? We didn't know why. Because
he had never said anything.
He was never a depressed kid. He struggled with getting bullied in middle school and high school, and he was always the smaller kid of his age group. We probably should have held him back a year because he was right there on that cusp, and I think he would have done a lot better. But, you know, he was, in my mind, Gavin was living his best life. He was so happy. He was happy that he was going off to college. He was confident in who he was. He had just gotten saved.
Yeah. He seemed to love his job.
Yes.
People at his job loved him.
Right. I mean, he was living his best version of his life. So there's no signs. And then, of course, the question is why? And then my other problem that I had was, you know, I'm a big Second Amendment guy. But whenever Gavin and Cohen got up into that middle school age, you had these school shootings, so I made sure I kept all of my weapons locked up. And the only reason there was a gun available is because we went camping, and I'd left the gun in the camper with the wife cleaning out the camper, put it on the counter. Me and Callahan walked in there. He goes to reach for it. And I said, no, and I go and grab the gun, and I run inside. I stick it up on the highest shelf that we have, which you got to be about 6 foot to kind of reach up there to begin with, and then run back out there and get him. So it was a perfect storm. Within that 24 hours, my son seen that there was a gun there, had access to it, and went and took his life with it. So I was kicking myself there as well. One of the reasons I want to be as transparent as possible, because I feel like there's 100 different things that I could have done.
Yeah.
That could have possibly changed the outcome. You never know what you're going to say.
How do you deal with that?
I'm going through therapy right now, and you know, on the therapy side, I don't think it's as bad. But my problem is more of the PTSD stuff that I'm dealing with now. But luckily, we've got some great professionals in the area. I've had so much community support, as you said. So many people reached out. I can't imagine losing a child and not having that community support.
Yeah.
Because it was unreal. Those 30 days afterwards are just a blur. But to make it worse, 2 days after he killed himself, we found out that he was being blackmailed. We didn't know why. And at that time, I'm praying, God, give me grace instead of vengeance in my heart if this is a local kid. Because I didn't want to end up in a situation where I feel this anger and this hatred towards some kid that was blackmailing, because bottom line is that's a kid that made a mistake as well. And whenever I say I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, I truly mean that. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy to lose a child. It was my worst fear was always losing my wife and kids, like in a car accident or something. But I think having a kid take his own life was far worse, because it makes you feel like you failed as a parent in every way. You've tried to do anything and everything you can, but it wasn't good enough. And then to look at my wife and see her hurt, it's like I feel like I failed as a father. I failed as a husband. And I don't truly feel like I failed, but that's that initial feeling, of course. But we ended up finding out that he was being blackmailed, but didn't know exactly why until my 16-year-old gets a phone call through Instagram. And he just picks up the phone. He's in the hallway. He picks up the phone. He says, I don't know who you are, and he hangs up the phone on him. It was not very nice to him. I said, let me see your phone. And I looked, and it was a profile of a girl that was friends with Gavin on Facebook. And she had even put a message on Gavin's post saying, do you have what we talked about on there? And then it was maybe
on Gavin's post?
On Gavin's post, where he posted when he come back from camp, talking about how he finally had Jesus. It was better than any drug or anything else. Mm-hmm. That girl even come on there and posted something there. And whenever that happened, and then I had an aunt reach out of Concord. I have an uncle that's, my mom had me very young, but I have an uncle that's only a year or two older than me, and his wife reached out. This blackmailer had also reached out to her teen and was blackmailing him over Gavin. And what we found out it was is something called sextortion. Mm-hmm. And most people just simply are not aware of it. But they pretend that they're a girl in a school across town. They have mutual friends, so you get these little friend requests, and people accept them because it's a pretty girl. Mm-hmm. No harm, no foul. But all of a sudden, they got 20 mutual friends with you, and whenever they start messaging you, you assume, oh, well, I might not know exactly who it is, but they know who it is. And next thing you know, they're sending over, I mean, let's be honest, it's child pornography, because they're pretending to be a teenager to begin with. So where they're getting these pictures and videos to begin with is a whole nother story. Mm-hmm. But they send over a child pornography to a boy or a girl, and then they convince that boy or girl to send pictures back. And then whenever they send over a compromising photo or video, they tend to try to extort them. Well, in Gavin's case, it was easy. They'd already researched that I was running for the state house. Mm-hmm. They took political headlines and put Gavin's picture on it, and his name on it. It was threatening to release it to all of his friends and everyone on social media. And I still don't know how long this was going on for. But Gavin tried to pay them. I think he only had $25 in his account, and he tried to pay through Venmo or PayPal $25 to him. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of getting off topic here, but they send those pictures, and then they extort you, and they were trying to extort the cousin, and then we got SLED involved. SLED's automatically involved anytime a minor dies. Mm-hmm. So they were involved, coroner's office and the York County Sheriff's Department. SLED ended up taking lead on the case, and they got on and started talking as if they were my 16-year-old, back and forth with this person. And of course, I can see the messages, but we're under the instructions to not reply at the same time. But to sit there and realize that this person that's blackmailing understands that my one son took his life, and yet they're trying to extort my other son. It even went further. So July 27th was the date that Gavin took his life. I had not been in contact with the person that was doing the blackmailing, and we went out of town. Gavin's 18th birthday would have been August 20th. And we're sitting in Myrtle Beach, and I get a message on Instagram that says that I tell you your son begged for his life, with a laughing face emoji. And I just lost it. So started going back and forth with them. I mean, I feel like we should have been able to trace it a lot sooner. I had the ability, from my experience with advertising and knowing people in digital, where I could have sent an email to track down and see exactly where this come from. But then I'm being told by SLED that's illegal. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. But yet I don't feel like our law enforcement at that time moved quick enough to get that information. And I don't know all the details, but now we've got a different task force that's on it that's being handled on a federal level. The IP address is coming out of a different country. These are all problems that we have. I think social media is one big problem, and I think social media companies are to blame. They're allowing child pornography to pass back and forth through these channels. They're aware that these are fake profiles, and they're aware that they are targeting teens. And yet they're more interested in their bottom line and their stock price of allowing these things to happen. And then they're allowing, not only do they promote that, but now they're used to, if you want to commit a crime, you're on the dark web. Now all you got to do is get on social media. They're selling fentanyl on Snapchat. They're selling drugs on Snapchat. And these messages disappear, and they're encrypted, and, oh, this is all great. Well, it's not great whenever you're dealing with children. Mm-hmm. I'm all for freedom, but once you start dealing with children and you start dealing with crime being committed through these channels, and they're not doing anything to stop it, that's a major issue. And they're using, if you pull a warrant for a profile for a social media company, they're only going to give you the information on that one profile. From my understanding, that's the way it works. That seemed to be the case with Gavin's case, at least. These people don't use one profile. They're using multiple profiles. And whenever that warrant's pulled, they shut down that profile. Well, that person just moves on to another one. Like the person that was extorting Gavin originally, the username was Bella Janet 28, and then it changed to Bella Janet 30, like the very next day. Mm-hmm. And they continued to extort going through there. But if someone sends you a friend request through one of these programs, you can choose block that person and any new profiles that they create. But yet if you're pulling a warrant, it doesn't seem to work that way.
Yeah.
And then you got to deal with state laws, you got to deal with federal laws, and then you got to deal with international laws. And then, you know, what are these other countries going to do if they know what's going on? To me, if you're blackmailing someone, if I'm blackmailing you and you go and rob a bank to pay me, then I believe you should be held guilty of robbing that bank as well, because you're committing that crime. That's not something that we really have in place now, from my understanding, but I believe that the extortion itself, I want to make a law in South Carolina, and I'm working on a pre-file right now to where I want to make it hurt. If you cross our state lines and you target one of our children, I can't do anything on a national level, but if you target a child or a minor in South Carolina, I want to punish you to the furthest possible that I can. Mm-hmm. And I want to send a message to all these extortionists out here. If you're selling drugs, if you're using these social media companies, there's got to be a way to change that, and hopefully we can do that as well. Social media they say that they're media, but they're not. It's like the Wild West. We don't have these rules in place to protect, and they're getting away with anything and everything that they want to. Mm-hmm. And if they were responsible, that would be one thing, but they're not being responsible.
There's a whole lot to unpack in all this. I want to back up a little bit. So the first thing I want to touch on before we get too far down the timeline and what your future plans are, you mentioned the community response. What was that? And then kind of you were very transparent about everything that your family was going through, and very public. You were transparent in a very public way, probably more so than just about anybody else would be under similar circumstances. A lot of people tend to like turtle up in periods like that.
And that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And I'm sure that was tempting. So yeah, walk me through that mindset, you know, with people coming to you. Walk me through the decision to kind of share your story and your tragedy with everybody else.
I mean, I can't explain the feeling, but the trauma. You know, you have grief, but you don't typically have a traumatic event and grief together. Mm-hmm. And both of them were attacking me at the same time. Then throw on the fact that we're continuing to be extorted as well. Mm-hmm. So it was a ton on me, and that's even before the community, but I felt like night one, within 24 hours of Gavin taking his life, that I felt responsible. I did. I felt like I have preached, man up, don't own your feelings, don't let your feelings control you. And I felt like I felt as a father with two sons, raising them, that you're weak if you cry. And what I found was that you're actually stronger if you can cry and own your emotions and control them. Mm-hmm. And whenever everything happened, my thought process was he was depressed. He, had all of these issues, and he felt like he couldn't talk to me. And I felt like I failed as a father. So I wanted to put a message out there right now, like, quit doing this. Quit acting like things don't bother us. If you feel like crying, share your emotions, own your emotions. Let's get that out there. And that was my first video message, was that. It was just informing people that I lost my son. I didn't say to suicide. I heard people think that it was a drug overdose for multiple things. But, I didn't really go into which detail because my wife did not want me sharing a lot as well. but I felt like it was important, especially after I posted that first video, as I felt better. And then I was thinking, well, anyone that loses a child needs to know what to do, because I'm Googling, and I'm hearing from parents that lost a kid a year and a half or 2 years ago, and they're telling their story, but there's no real raw emotion with it. And bottom line is, I think day 2 or day 3, I was just so angry. I'm sitting there, and just this wave of anger comes over me, and I want to break something. I want to hurt somebody. So I went out to my shop and told my wife, I was like, look, I'm going to put on some safety glasses. I'm going to grab some gloves. I'm going to grab a sledgehammer, and I'm going to start busting some concrete block up. And she's like, okay, do what you need to do. I walked into the shop. I screamed to the top of my lungs, which was very liberating to get that out. I grabbed the sledgehammer and I started to swing. And I was like, wait a minute, I need to record this because someone's going to go through this. And even though I'm in politics, I'm tired of politicians acting like they're not normal, everyday people. I'm a normal, everyday person fighting for normal, everyday people. Mm-hmm. And as long as I've got to be real as well. Whether it was right or wrong, doesn't matter. It's what it is. So I put the camera up and I started bashing block. I probably had some foul language in there. I probably had a lot of things that throughout all them videos that you wouldn't expect to see from somebody in politics. But to me, it's more important for people to have some type of guidebook to go with. You go through I have a strong belief in Christ, but the hardest thing in the world is to sit there and feel faithful mm-hmm. whenever your child's lost life and people come in and say, oh, it's part of God's plan. It's part of God's plan. And it's like, well, I don't want to hear that right now. God's plan shouldn't involve taking my child away from me. Why did my child feel this way? And let me get through that. I think in some way I'm trying, and this is something I talked about in therapy today. I feel like now my push, I have a purpose. Whenever I ran initially, I had talking points and had things I'm upset with, but now I have a passion. I have a purpose, and that's what I'm planning on doing in the State House. I don't know how I will feel if I fail to get these laws passed. Because I feel like I can justify God's plan of me being able to save other kids if I can get these laws passed. But if I fail, where does that put me?
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that worried me a little bit. But I have, just since posting the video, there's 7 families in York County. That video, within the first 3 days, over 10,000 views, and 7 families in York County have reached out to me to state they were currently being extorted, had been extorted. One was a teen that was suicidal that watched the video and went to their parents to tell them they were being extorted. And if it wasn't for that video. So things like that make me feel great. And I was extremely depressed with everything. And then, you had a 13-year-old named Gavin that took his own life in Rock Hill as well. Mm-hmm. And whenever that happened, that was a kick. And it was like, all right, get up, quit whining. You've got to get out here and you got to fight. And I personally feel responsible for any child that's taken their life in my area, in York County. Mm-hmm. And my sole purpose, like I said before, was starting businesses or whatever else. I operate on faith. I don't know where my finances will be. I don't know where my business is going to be, but I know my purpose now is to save children. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm going to fight for. Mm-hmm. Everything else will work its way out.
When did you have the realization? Because what you've done is basically give someone, the world, a very clear window through to basically, the darkest period somebody can go through. Did you ever have the conscious realization that that's what you were doing?
Yeah. I wanted people that go through those dark times to have a way to see that it's okay to not be okay. Mm-hmm. That's the simplest way of putting it. Whenever I'm angry, whenever I'm sad, everything can be going good, and all of a sudden something just hits me, and I'm just broken. I'm bawling my eyeballs out, and I can't explain why. You know, some people in the past, I might have looked at that and was like, man, they're weak. All right, get over it. You know, now I feel like God has a way of teaching you tolerance on things. Mm-hmm. And with me being raised by a single mom most of my life, I felt like I was raised with what people would deem as like a toxic masculine culture. My mom wanted me to be masculine. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anything's wrong with that. I think that's one of the things we're lacking. But being masculine doesn't mean hiding your emotions. It's okay for boys to cry. It's okay for men to tell each other they love each other. You know, that's one of those things. I think and especially we talked about the community coming together. You know, Gavin sent out it's a less than 3, which looks like a heart. He sent that out right before he took his life.
Who did he send that out to?
He sent it out to some friends on social media. Mm-hmm. And I think that was it.
Like in a private message, basically?
Yeah, just like a mass message to his friends. Mm-hmm. One more thing about that, too. A child makes a decision to take his life and actually commits the act within 20 minutes. So for you to think that this can't happen to you, I'm telling you it can.
So it's a highly impulsive decision.
Over 51.
This isn't like premeditated
50,
for
right.
months of lingering depression.
Right.
It's
and that we keep talking about mental health, but to even to make that stat even more shocking is that if there is a weapon available, that time is cut down to 3 minutes.
These are national
statistics. Mm-hmm. And the probability of suicide with a gun is almost guaranteed compared to everything else. As I think one of the stats I was reading was over 90% of the people that try to commit suicide are not successful.
Unless it's with a gun, and then
then you're pretty successful. I mean, there's not too many cases that you're going to go to that extreme. Mm-hmm. And kids will hang themselves. You know, one of the things I was told right away was, don't blame yourself because of that gun. Because if he wanted to kill himself, he would have hung himself. He would have, cut himself. He would have done all these took a bunch of pills. Mm-hmm. All of those things that I feel like as parents, we've got to try to protect our kids from. Doesn't mean that we can. But I think ultimately it boils down to we've got to protect our kids from these from these predators online that have no basis. Mm-hmm. But we also have to teach mental fortitude, which we've gotten away from. We don't teach the values that we once used to come home and we'd watch these after-school programs. Now we're teaching inclusivity instead of teaching morals. And I would say all of that is important, but you cannot remove the moral fabric from our youth. Mm-hmm. We're giving trophies. You're telling kids that they're all winners, and I'm first one to tell you, you're not all winners. But whenever you lose, you learn, you become better. Yeah. That's what makes you a winner.
You have to do that gracefully.
You asked me about the sales whenever I did advertising. What made me successful is everyone else focused on the yeses. I focused on the no's. The stats where you got to get 11 no's before you got 1 yes. All I did was count the no's. I didn't care about the yeses. I'm going through the no's because the more no's I get, the more yeses I get. Mm-hmm. And that's just a hustle game. I'm just going to pound these phones and I'm going to knock on these doors and I'm going to get those answers.
You're that much closer to a yes. Yeah.
And that was what it was exciting to me. But that's that mental fortitude. And I think because, my generation, we grew up with some adversity. With my mom having me as a teen and not really having much growing up, we grew up with adversity.
Right.
So you had to learn to get over those things. And I think a lot of times our kids do not face these issues. As much as I try not to baby my kids are spoiled rotten. Like they don't have the same fortitude that I did.
Right. They weren't faced with those things when they were younger. Because, you've offered, familial stability and in a comfortable home and all the things.
They don't know what it's like to go without a warm meal or
not have power.
On. Yeah.
Yeah. Like those are things. Obviously a lot of people are faced with that and increasingly so recently, but.
And those kids, I think, end up being the strongest. Mm-hmm. I really do.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating for kids to be, to not be able to get by, But I'm telling you, those things make the character. They make you the man. That's one of the other problems we got. We're too busy judging people on who they were instead of who they are. Mm-hmm. We tell our kids that anything they do online is going to last forever. We're telling our kids that. And then even if we're not telling them, our media is showing them that, because we're sitting here and we're laughing at Hunter Biden pictures from 10 years ago. That's not who the man that he is today. And I don't know who he is or whether he's still a crackhead or whatever. But bottom line is, quit judging people on their past. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen it with the Supreme Court nominee getting blasted for things that happened whenever he was in college.
Allegedly.
And it's all of that stuff that is, and if it's a true crime, I understand, but this canceling people on who they were instead of who they are has got to stop.
Do you think Gavin had that fear?
Yes, I do, completely. I think that he had, not only that, I think as adults, we try to only show the best of our lives. Mm-hmm. And we try to act like we've got it figured out. Do you remember what it was like as a young man transitioning into adulthood and feeling like you were not sufficient enough?
Right. And we had the benefit of going through that process without being in the midst of social media and everything that entails.
Right. But they're being held responsible for everything. Mm-hmm. And whenever you're looking at your parents and saying, well, my parents did this by the time they were my age, and all these people's got this, and all my friends are off of these great colleges and universities, and they've got all this going on, it makes you feel like a failure. Mm-hmm. Instead of just being real.
Do you think it's that threat of, being canceled or people judging you? That seems to be the vein that these people who are engaged in this extortion are kind of touching on or taking advantage of.
And that's important.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to fuss at my kids and tell them to get outside and play. Mm-hmm. Bottom line is their playground is online. It is with those friends. Some of Gavin's best friends that he had were kids that he played games with, never even went to school. A couple of the kids were homeschool kids that he would have never met.
Interact with on a regular basis.
Yeah, but they became best of friends because they would play games together. They'd play Minecraft, or they would play, I don't even know all the names of the games, but the zombie games and stuff, But they would play those games, and that became their friends and their friend group. And there's a wide age range of 4 to 5 years. But it's all those kids, and they can be themselves on there. Or they can be the best version of themselves, or the worst version too. You see that a lot too.
Yeah.
But that is their social interaction. We used to hang out in a parking lot and, shoot the bull and go back and forth or throw dice or whatever you used to do.
I still see a lot of kids hanging out at the cookout parking lot on Friday nights. I think that's...
Would you rather your kid hang out at cookout parking lot or be on a video game?
I mean, if they're in my home, I think I'd rather have them in my home. So, yeah, it gives you a bit more supervision.
Yeah, but the difference is whenever you were bullied, whenever we were growing up, you could escape it.
Yeah.
You can't escape it now.
Yeah, because
you go home, everywhere. They're coming right after you. You can sit here and you can say, I'm not going to let my kids get on social media. Well, then you're making them a pariah right away.
Basically making them a target, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And anything can be said about them, and they cannot defend themselves. And everyone knows it, except for them. So you don't want to keep them off of that. Mm-hmm. Well, then you say, well, I'm going to put all these apps on my phone to control everything. I don't care who you are. We did not grow up with the technology. You cannot keep up with the technology that's out there because there's always a new app. There's always something new. Those kids that their parents had them on lockdown, once they're 18, they've already created a new app. They're getting something else out there. And there's always a way for that to happen. So the best thing to do is to educate the kids, educate the teens. I view this as in the 80s, abstinence is what was taught. And everyone said, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex. Everyone's having sex. But whenever the girl ends up pregnant, they pointed at her and called her a whore. That's the way these kids feel with that sextortion. We say, don't send pics, don't send pics, don't send pics. They're all doing it back and forth. But then whenever one picture gets out, then they all point at them and cancel them. Yeah.
So I guess you're kind of blessed. You've got the marketing mind, and you have this new platform in state politics. That's some stars aligning that give you like a more ability than others might have under certain circumstances or similar circumstances to affect change. How do you leverage? You've already mentioned the pending legislation or what you want to do legally, but how do you leverage those other assets? I mean, you've got a large reach on social media. You've got a strong marketing mind. Obviously, you've got your reach into politics. How do you combine all of those things and leverage them into a cohesive forward movement towards the change you want to accomplish?
Hustle. I mean, bottom line is my life story. I'm going to hustle. I'm going to make it happen. Regardless of whether that's a massive scale fight with these social media companies. The number one thing that I really wish would happen, and I've discussed with you a little bit outside of the podcast, but in Europe they set a precedent by listing the cause of suicide for a teen as social media. And that was the only thing that was written on that death certificate. Well, that caused international news. In the U.S., no one set that precedent. And I would love to see our York County coroner set that precedent here because that will bring a national media attention to this. It will draw that focus. The sextortion is even YouTube has my video blocked for anyone under age 18 now because I discuss suicide in it. And those are probably the ones that are committing
the message. Yeah,
right. Those are the ones that are being targeted. I want every school. I want every high school. Every high schooler, I believe, should hear this. To some extent, some middle school, not necessarily with the sextortion, but the dangers of social media. Because you start getting on social media whenever you're about 13.
I think that just needs to be a part of curriculum now. I mean, we talk about the education being based on the world in which we live. I mean, the genie is not going back in the bottle. You're not going to put social media away. So to what extent should a child's just formative education be how to live in that world?
I would love to say that would be the way to go, but at the same time, I get more and more concerned with what our schools are teaching our kids.
Yeah.
I would be scared they would be sitting there showing them how to take pictures without showing their face.
Yeah, how do you control the set of values that are necessary to make those decisions?
And I'm not condoning sending explicit photos over the internet. What I'm saying is whether you think your child is or not, there's a very high probability they are.
Right. And instead of passing judgment, figure out a way to help those people. And
we've all done stupid things. We just didn't have social media.
Thank God.
Yeah. I mean, I joke around and say, I drove the Wu-Tang Clan van in high school, but I literally did.
Yeah.
I mean, I drove a lowrider van around town. I was one of those little punk kids getting into trouble and fighting and
the big yellow van with the Wu-Tang symbol on the side. I remember.
So, I mean, but that's what made me who I am. In all of that stuff is important. Just as we want to protect our kids, but if we're sheltering them from everything, or if we're telling them everything is normal, then nothing is normal.
Yeah,
they've got to learn to embrace being different. And I strive. Every one of my vehicles stands out. I always want to stand out in some way, shape, or form. Even from the beard, it's different than other people are wearing.
Yeah, break the mold of what people expect from a politician or a business owner or whatever.
I love catching people by surprise
in a positive way.
I love playing the all shucks and catching them by surprise.
Well, there's 3 different groups of people that I'm curious, what your message is to them individually. One of those is parents who've been through something similar. The second is teens who might be faced with similar circumstances as Gavin. And 3, the larger community and specifically like their reaction to what y'all went through.
Well, first of all, parents, especially the ones that are going through this, and the reason sextortion isn't talked about, because you're not going to ruin your own child's reputation once they've been extorted.
And a lot of people, like, to my point earlier about you being open and transparent, a lot of people are reluctant to do that because they're afraid of that image or reputation or whatever being ruined. And
I truly, we can sit here and we talk COVID, we talk mental health, all of that. I am convinced that a large portion of these teen suicides we are seeing is due to sextortion, not just COVID-related matters. They're doing more online. They're in their rooms, and I think that's causing.
You think there's a whole bottom of the iceberg that we're not even aware of?
Yeah, and I think people are just not talking about it. I posted a video the other day of a lady. It was just a little Snapchat video. It had 6,000 responses. Or what Snapchat? It was TikTok. 6,000 responses, and about every other one was somebody saying, my kid was extorted. But not enough parents are saying, my kid, or just say my family is being extorted. I mean, I've even talked to a professional in the Rock Hill area that paid someone $50,000, and they would never speak up and say anything because this is a married individual that can lose everything. But just because he thought he was chatting with someone online, sent some pictures, and they extorted him for $50,000. Now, he felt like he could open up to me, and I'm not going to share his information, but sharing these stories and getting the word out that this is something that is really happening consistently.
So is the goal to, A, not to interrupt, but to get the word out, but B, if it's out, it takes some of the sting and the threat away from the people who are trying to leverage that threat, from these people who are extorting it.
Right.
And if someone tries, so I guess is your hope that in a near future, if teens or adults, even whoever is going through something like this where they're being extorted, that person who trying to extort them doesn't have the power to ruin their life because they know that the community in which they live is going to be more understanding of their situation.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, as far as the parents that are going through it.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the Me Too movement. Why not have a Me 3 movement? And with the little heart symbol. You don't have to go into your details, but law enforcement can't do anything about these people extorting you because they aren't local. The laws have to change. If I was on a federal level in any country that is not prosecuting these people that are doing the extorting, they would never get any help. I plan on being the same way in the state house. Any legislator that wants to go against me on this, don't ever ask me for help for anything. I mean, this is personal to me. This is a fight. But I think the parents need to get the word out because the ones that are aware, they're just too ashamed to say anything. Just say, Me 3, I've been extorted. My family's been extorted. Don't go into detail.
Yeah, or
just let people know that. Let people know how common this is. Or even if you don't want to do that, just share my video or share someone else's video that's getting the word out. Because what we're not getting is the media traction that we need. And then you got these social media companies, whenever I'm bashing them, they're not going to share my stuff. I mean, in YouTube, to put a age restriction content on my video, these Moms for Boys groups didn't want to share my video. Like, how idiotic is that? If you're raising young men, and boys are typically the ones that are targeted with this, you want this information out. But yet they got this holier than thou, and we're too good, and this will never happen, and so we're not going to share it. Well, your kid may be next. And we've got to, it's that important just to get the information out. Whenever you start talking about the kids that are going through this, if you don't feel like going to your parents, message me. I don't care. I'll go after these people directly. But do not buy into that you can pay and keep this from happening. If you get extorted, the only way that you can stop it at that point, once you've sent that photo, is to delete all your social media. And that still does not guarantee that they're not going to send it to someone. But you could blast that person. I mean, we've gotten really good at being online trolls. Why not throw it right back on that person? Why not report that person for extortion immediately? Report them for child pornography. You are a child. you're not going to get in trouble like they're going to get in trouble. These are grown adults that are doing this. These are not children. Mm-hmm. And these are massive criminal enterprises. This is not like some guy sitting in his
basically like.
Yeah, I mean, one of the arrests that was made was a kid that was replying to a work-at-home ad in Maryland that's basically just handling money. Has no clue of what's going on. All he's doing is transferring money as a job and getting a little bit of money for it. Mm-hmm. Well, now he's caught up in this sextortion ring. And wow. I'm really, we talk about the sex trafficking, human trafficking. I'm really curious as to where these extortionists get the photos and videos to send over to begin with.
Yeah. Where are
they getting videos and pictures of 15, 16-year-old girls to send to all these boys? You know? Mm-hmm. I think that it is a lot larger scale than what we're aware of. I think this is the new, if I'm an organized crime, this is a quick way to make a quick buck. And if you really don't have a care. Mm-hmm. I think that there are organizations that are truly farming this.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is,
I want to bring them all down.
Sophisticated enterprises at scale.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm not an attorney, so my approach, I'm more of the Toby Keith, hang them from a tree style. Mm-hmm. But, I really want to see every person that extorts a child or traffics a child, that harms a child. I think a pastor replied to me the other day and said that the Bible says it best. It says hang a millstone from their neck. I'm perfectly fine with that. Mm-hmm. You attack a child, and I believe you lose every right. Mm-hmm. But I understand I'm in the minority of that. And there's people that have to defend scum of the earth like that. My goal is not to defend them. My goal is to prosecute them.
Yeah. And create the laws under which that can occur.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the last thing you said, the community.
Yeah, that's right.
The community, I would say, let's all be better about not judging each other. Let's quit jumping on each other. Just because you see someone shake hands with someone does not make them an evil person. Because someone voted for Trump or because someone voted for Biden does not mean that they agree with everything that they did. I don't agree with 100% of anyone. I've told you before, you and Wes Clymer, Ralph Norman, y'all are all guys that I look up to politically. I've always agreed with y'all. But I don't agree with any one of you on every single thing. We have plenty of different votes.
Right.
We have our own opinions, but I have that respect because I know where your heart is. I know where Wes's heart is. I know where Ralph's heart is. It's that servant leadership that I think that we need more of. And it's hard to be a servant leader in today's climate because you're constantly getting attacked. Gary Simrell said it great the other night. He said that in politics, you're sworn in, sworn at, and then sworn out. I mean, that's pretty much the way it is. As soon as you're sworn in, people start cussing at you and fussing at you, and no one's ever happy with you.
That's right.
And you're just trying to do what's best.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, again, Brandon, your courage in the face of all this is just inspiring. Thank you for coming to talk today. I know it's not always easy, but continue to do what you do and let us know how we can help.
Thank you, man.
Yep.
I appreciate it.